I am 97 years old, and the first thing people notice about me now is how quiet I have become. They think silence comes with age, that when you live this long, words just run out. But that's not true. Silence doesn't come from age. It comes from being left behind. I used to have a house full of noise. Laughter echoing through the walls, little feet running across wooden floors, doors slamming, someone always calling out, "Mom," from another room. Back then, I thought the chaos would never end. I remember standing in the kitchen, flour on my hands, dinner burning slightly on the stove, and thinking, one day I'll miss this. I didn't know how right I was. I had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. They were my whole world. Their father passed when the youngest was just 6, a heart attack, quick and cruel. Just like that, I went from being a wife and mother to being everything at once. I didn't have time to grieve the way I wanted to. There were school lunches to pack, bills to pay, tears to wipe that weren't my own. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I cleaned houses in the mornings, worked at a diner in the afternoons, and stitched clothes late into the night. There were nights I slept sitting up, because if I lay down, I knew I wouldn't wake up in time. But I never complained, because every time I looked at them, I knew why I was doing it. I remember one winter when we couldn't afford proper heating. The pipes had frozen, and the house felt like a refrigerator. I gave all the blankets to my kids and sat in the corner, wrapping my arms around myself, pretending I wasn't cold. My youngest woke up that night and came over to me. He said, "Mom, you can have my blanket." I smiled and told him I wasn't cold. Mothers lie like that, not to deceive, but to protect. Years passed, slowly, painfully, but they passed. My children grew up. They went to college. I remember the pride in my chest the day each of them left home with a suitcase and big dreams. I thought, this is it. This is what all those sleepless nights were for. They started building their own lives, good jobs, nice houses, families of their own. I would sit by the phone, waiting for their calls. Sometimes they came, sometimes they didn't. But I understood. Life gets busy. At least that's what I told myself. Holidays became shorter. Visits became rarer. Conversations became surface level. They would ask, "How are you, Mom?" And before I could answer, they were already talking about something else. I didn't mind. Or maybe I did. But I didn't allow myself to admit it. I kept their rooms exactly the way they left them. Their childhood things, their old books, even the little drawings they made for me. I dusted them every week, like they were coming back any day. Hope is a stubborn thing. Then came the day everything changed. I had a fall in the kitchen. My legs aren't what they used to be, and I slipped. I lay there for hours before the neighbor found me. The hospital said I couldn't live alone anymore. It wasn't safe. My children came together to discuss options. I remember sitting there, listening to them talk about me like I wasn't in the room. She needs care. We all have responsibilities. We can't give her the attention she needs. And then someone said it. A nursing home would be best. Best. Such a simple word, such a heavy decision. I didn't argue. What was there to say? I had spent my whole life putting their needs first. Why would I stop now? They told me it would be temporary. Just until we figure things out, Mom. I nodded. Mothers always nod. The day they brought me here, I packed a small suitcase, a few clothes, some photographs, my wedding ring, even though my husband had been gone for decades. It still felt like home when I wore it. They walked me into the building. Bright lights, clean floors, polite smiles from strangers. It didn't feel like a place for living. It felt like a place for waiting. We sat in a small room while paperwork was signed. I kept looking at my children, trying to memorize their faces. Something in me already knew this wasn't temporary. When it was time for them to leave, my daughter hugged me. It was quick, careful, like she didn't want to stay too long. "We'll visit soon, Mom." I smiled. "Of course," I said. I watched them walk away. I didn't cry, not then. I waited until that night when the lights were off and the room was quiet, except for the sound of someone coughing down the hall. That's when it hit me. Not the loneliness, the realization. I had given them everything, and now I was no longer part of their lives. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Visits became phone calls became silence. I stopped asking when they would come. It's a dangerous question when you already know the answer. Here in this place, I see stories like mine every day. Faces at the window, waiting. Hands clutching old photographs. People who once had full lives, now reduced to memories and routines. We are not here because we are weak. We are here because we became inconvenient. There's a difference. Sometimes I sit outside in the small garden. The sun feels warm on my skin, and for a moment I close my eyes and pretend I'm back in my old house. I can almost hear the laughter again. Almost. But when I open my eyes, it's gone, just like that. I don't hate my children. That's the strange part. People expect bitterness, anger, but all I feel is love. A quiet, aching love that doesn't know where to go anymore. Because that's what being a mother does to you. It doesn't end when they leave. It doesn't end when they forget. It doesn't even end when they abandon you. Love stays, even when everything else is gone. If there's one thing I wish I could tell them, it's not, "Why did you do this to me?" It's something much simpler. I miss you. Not the adults they've become, not the busy, distant versions of themselves. I miss the children who used to run into my arms without hesitation. I miss the voices that used to fill my home. I miss being needed. Because in the end, that's what hurts the most. Not the nursing home, not the silence, but the feeling that my presence no longer matters. I am 97 years old. I have lived through wars, loss, hunger, and hardship. But nothing has ever felt as heavy as being forgotten by the people I lived for. If you're listening to me right now, if you still have your parents, call them, visit them, sit with them, even if there's nothing to say. Because one day there will be nothing left to say, and silence is a terrible thing when it's the only thing you have left. At 97, you start to believe your story has already been told, that whatever mattered has already happened, and the rest is just waiting. But life has a strange way of continuing, even when you feel like you've been left behind. Mornings here begin early, too early for old bones that ache through the night. A nurse comes in, gently wakes me, helps me sit up. She smiles every time, the same practiced smile, but her eyes are kind. I've learned to notice small things like that. When your world becomes small, details become everything. I sit by the window after breakfast. It's my favorite place. There's a tree outside, tall, steady, unchanged. I've watched it through the seasons now. Leaves growing, turning, falling, and then growing again. It reminds me that life moves on, whether we're part of it or not. Sometimes families come to visit others here. You can always tell when someone is expecting a visitor. They sit a little straighter, fix their clothes, check the hallway every few minutes. Hope. It doesn't fade easily. There's a woman down the hall, Margaret. She's younger than me, maybe 82. Every Sunday she waits near the entrance. Her son told her he would visit one of these Sundays. That was 8 months ago. Still, every Sunday she waits. I used to think that was foolish. Now I understand. It's not foolish. It's human. I had stopped waiting for my children, not because I didn't want to see them, but because hope can be painful when it has nowhere to land. I told myself I was at peace with it, but then something happened. One afternoon, a young volunteer came in. She couldn't have been more than 20. Bright eyes, nervous smile. She walked up to me and said, "Would you like some company?" It felt like such a simple question, but I didn't know how to answer it. When you've been alone for so long, even kindness feels unfamiliar. Still, I nodded. She sat beside me and started talking. Not about anything important, just little things. Her college, her classes, how she didn't know what she wanted to do with her life yet. And then she asked me something no one had asked in a very long time. What was your life like? For a moment, I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I had too much. I started slowly. I told her about my husband, about the small house we built together, about the nights I stayed up sewing just to make ends meet, about my children, how they used to laugh, how they used to need me. She listened, really listened. Not the way people do when they're waiting for their turn to speak, but the kind of listening that makes you feel seen. I didn't realize it, but somewhere in the middle of that conversation, I started to feel alive again, as if my life hadn't just disappeared into the past, as if it still mattered. She began visiting more often after that. Not every day, but enough. She would bring little things, a book, a flower, sometimes just her time. And I found myself looking forward to those moments. It confused me at first. How could a stranger make me feel more remembered than my own children? I struggled with that thought. It felt wrong, disloyal somehow. But the truth doesn't ask for permission. The truth is, we don't just need family. We need connection. We need someone who sees us, hears us, acknowledges that we exist beyond just being a responsibility. One day she brought me a small notebook. "For your stories," she said. I laughed. At my age, who would want to read them? She smiled and said something I'll never forget. I would. That night I opened the notebook. My hands trembled, not from age, but from something else. Fear. Because writing meant remembering, and remembering can hurt. But I started anyway. I wrote about my children's first steps, their first day of school, the way they used to hold my hand so tightly, like they were afraid to let go. I wrote about the sacrifices I never spoke about, the nights I cried quietly so they wouldn't hear, the choices I made so they could have better ones. Page after page, my life began to take shape again, not as something lost, but as something that had meaning. Days passed and something inside me began to change. The emptiness didn't disappear, but it softened. I started talking to other residents more, listening to their stories, sharing mine. It turns out, when you carry a lifetime inside you, it doesn't take much to connect with someone else who does too. We laughed sometimes. Can you believe that? At 97, in a place people come to be forgotten, I found laughter again. But healing is not a straight path. There are still nights when the silence feels too loud. When I look at the door and for just a second imagine one of my children walking in. Those moments, they don't go away. And maybe they never will. But I've learned something I wish I understood earlier. Closure doesn't always come from the people who hurt you. Sometimes it comes from within. One evening, as the sun was setting, I sat by the window and thought about my children. Not with pain, but with clarity. They didn't abandon me in a single moment. It happened slowly, through missed calls, through postponed visits, through choosing everything else over me. And maybe, just maybe, they convinced themselves I would understand. Because I always did. That was my role, to understand, to forgive, to keep loving no matter what. And I still do. But I've also realized something important. Loving them doesn't mean I have to disappear. My life still has value, even here, even now. I don't know if they'll ever come back. I don't know if I'll hear their voices again or feel their arms around me. But I've stopped letting that question define my days. Because if I spend whatever time I have left waiting for something that may never happen, then I lose what little time I still have. And I've already lost enough. So now, when I sit by the window, I don't just look back, I look around. At the tree that keeps growing. At the people who are still here, at the young girl who chose to sit beside an old woman and listen. Life didn't end when I was brought to this place. It just became different, quieter, smaller, but not meaningless. If you're hearing my voice, if you're still somewhere in the middle of your life, thinking you have time, don't wait to show love. Don't assume people will always be there, because one day You might find yourself in a quiet room, holding on to memories, wishing for one more conversation, one more visit, one more moment. And trust me, when that day comes, you will realize something that took me 97 years to understand. It's not the big things we lose that break us. It's the absence of the small ones. A phone call, a hug, a simple, "I'm here." Don't wait until those things are gone to realize how much they matter.